Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and this is my list of the best movies of 2018. I think it was a very good year. I know there's sort of a debate whether it's like a fine year, a good year, a great year. I actually do think it was a pretty damn good year for the movies. We got a lot of more interesting studio stuff than I ever thought we'd really get this year. So my honorable mentions list I don't think has ever been this long. But I feel good about this list for the most part. I mainly make these as sort of a recommendation. So if you're sitting there and you're like, hey, what movies should I have seen in 2018 that I necessarily haven't, I would say these are good, but I also did actually list them on the films I felt that were best. But I also do look at it as these are films you should definitely check out if you're like, I want to see some good movies, because I know that's a certain thing people do with lists like this. Sorry this is later, it's always in February now, just because I'm trying to catch up and see everything. And there's a bunch of stuff I watched before I did this. Not a lot of it as catch-up movies got on here, to be honest, but you know, whatever. This is definitely an interesting year. We're seeing the rise of Netflix. We're seeing the rise of studios doing more interesting things with bigger blockbusters, I think, because there's sort of a financial gain to making people excited about your movie and see it over and over again. I also, you know, maybe we're just having a good studio year. Sometimes you have bad studio years and good studio years. It doesn't always work out. But there's so many interesting things going on in filmmaking, from films you never thought would come out to, you know, big blockbusters you never thought would be as good as they are, to surprise animated films. It's really been quite an interesting year at the movies for me, at least. So I hope it's been a good 2018 for you, to be honest. Alright, so now that 2018 is over, let's go into the top 10 list. Let's start with the honorable mentions. Now, these are films that at some point were probably on here, but there's a lot of good stuff. So here are my honorable mentions for 2018 that I did not get on my best of the year list. Black Klansman, Infinity War, Mission Impossible Fallout, The Night is Short, Walk On Girl, A Quiet Place, You Were Never Really Here, Annihilation. So here we go. Here are the top 10 best movies of 2018, according to me, myself, and I. Alright, so number 10 is Roma. Roma is a personal, interesting, nostalgic look at Mexico in the 70s, or really a very wealthy family living in Mexico in the neighborhood referred to Colonia Roma. This film is about Cleo, who is the housekeeper, watches after the children in this wealthy house. You see things of her life and how she, at the time, is pregnant, and how she has to deal with that and her relationships, which almost feels like it's playing in the background, this drama of what's actually going on within the family, how the father is kind of leaving the family and not really there very much, and you kind of are getting two kind of plot lines at once, but neither is necessarily the focus point. This film is almost all in wide shots and a lot of long takes. But because of that craft and because of those wide shots, it almost feels like you're observing everything that's going on. Like you are watching her, Cleo, witness all these things and sometimes get her perspective in. But it almost feels like her perspective is not the forefront, and even her own mind, because she's having to worry about this family, their children, the cleaning, the dog shit, all these things that kind of work within her character. Like there's a narrative. It's not just he did it to show off, like he's seen Fellini movies, and there is a strong Fellini influence in this. There's kind of a knowing of what was going on in the culture at the time, but almost like you're not being updated on it, but that's almost part of the point of Roma, is that these people are living out their lives, and like there's this massive like protest kind of riot scene, but like she's trying to look at a crib, and that's kind of like how life is a lot of the time. People still are getting dropped off at school, all those things are still happening while all this other stuff is going on in the background, and you might not be directly wrapped up into it, but it's wrapping you up anyway. And that was really an interesting way to contextualize society and societal changes and political changes. And the next one on here is the only documentary on here, and a documentary that inspired a lot of thoughts for me as someone who's been in making content or filmmaking or whatever we're calling it this week, and that would be number 9 with Shirkers. Shirkers is a very interesting and unique documentary, and as soon as I heard of the concept, I wanted to see it. It's about a filmmaker, Sandy Tan, who directed this film. She, alongside her friends, decided to make this film Shirkers, and was directed by their film teacher, and they shot this independent film all over Singapore, and it was going to be a road movie, even though Singapore is not that big, but whatever. After wrapping, they left the footage with the director, because, you know, why wouldn't you do that? And the rest of them went off to college, and then the director disappeared and he took the footage, and those three didn't see him or the footage ever again. And then 20 years later, after George's death, Sandy Tan was contacted by his widow and told that she had the film but didn't have the audio tracks, and then she made a documentary about the mystery of the production of that film, how she met George, everything like that. And that's basically what Shirkers is. Just the lore of that is fascinating enough to watch this movie and makes this film juicy and interesting. You feel like you're going into forgotten history, and in terms of Singaporean film, this was a major kind of lost media type of thing, especially because lost media is more of a thing. This is kind of like a fascinating portrait and a window to go through. But I also kind of look at this as someone, as myself, who has made quite a few things and has had quite a few things that I've spent lots and lots of time on go practically nowhere. I've had so many times where I'll be talking to a filmmaking buddy or someone who makes content, and we'll have a long conversation about all the crap that we've worked on that has never come out, or has just been delayed indefinitely and then eventually does come out, or things we've been paid for to work on that has never happened. And that's just sort of life. I recommend Shirkers for anyone who makes film. I especially recommend it for people who've been making film or content or whatever the fuck you want to call it for a long time, because it is just like very much like going down the rabbit hole of one of those conversations. All right, so number 8, kind of an interesting surprise from director Steve McQueen, and that would be Widows. Widows is very much a heist film, but it's very much a heist film made in a kind of classy Hollywood way. The way we don't really make movies anymore. It also is sort of like the way we make TV now. It feels like a peak TV HBO event type of show, but like brought down to like the 2-hour plus length that it is. There's tons of different plot lines in this ever complicated kind of story. It's not just about a bunch of widows who go on to do this heist so they can pay off these mobsters to leave them alone, but it's also about the city of Chicago. It's about this local election that's going on. It's about, these construction contracts. It's about a hair salon. It's about these families. It's about all these various different characters, and it's so interesting and kind of thought-provoking, and so many different ideas going on throughout it. You can't help but be kind of brought into it. It feels more kind of arty than most of these things usually are. It's not, I'd say, as interested in inviting you in as it is kind of showing you the circumstances of which this all happened. And that does feel, I guess, in the modern sense, more like you'd see something from Better Call Saul. You get that it's saying like so much more than that. It's saying the trauma these women have been through. It's saying the trauma that the city has been through. It's saying, how are we in the place we are right now? And number 7, I think you can't really talk about this year without talking about this movie. It was the biggest movie of the year in America. It was one of the biggest movies of the year in the world. It was one of the most talked about movies. And I think 2018 will go down as the year of Black Panther. It played on a theoretical level, which Ryan Coogler has always been amazing at. One of the smartest things about Ryan Coogler, and particularly his franchise work, which is like this and Creed, but is that he thinks about the theory of doing it again. When he directs something, he doesn't just go, oh, let's just make like a movie in this series. He thinks theoretically, where should this go? And much like how he theoretically came about a Rocky movie, he does that so much more. It's like next level in terms of all the ideas going on in Black Panther. He thinks about what is the world like with Wakanda? What would it be like to be an isolationist country at a time where people are getting more isolationist? But also talking about what happened to Africa and Black people all over the world and what has happened in the disenfranchisement. Even the villain in this kind of comes at it in a theoretical way, even though he's coming at it in an angry way. And Black Panther felt different. It felt like the big blockbusters of my youth, that kind of thing, but it also felt perfect in a way. Ryan Coogler has stepped up to epic, big Hollywood filmmaking in a way that very few people can go from independent director on this kind of epic scale and nail it as well as he does. Number 6 is probably showing that I'm a parent with this one, but I still think is one of the best animated films of the year. And number 6 is Mirai. There's no better time to think about the history of a family when a major family event happens, because you know that that event now reshapes the entire history of your family. It is a new chapter that you will now tell in the annals or the stories of your family. And this film is about a little boy who was the only child for a while. It starts off with his mother and father bringing his baby sister home from the hospital, who's called Mirai, and then he kind of has to get used to sharing the spotlight and kind of not sure sure what his place is, as his place in life, in his young little life, I think he's like 4 years old, has suddenly shifted. I think that is a real natural thing, not just for little kids, but anytime you have this place, whether it's in a social group or a family or a town or whatever, and suddenly you move or something's changed or someone else takes that space or something like that, it's hard to adapt to that. That's natural. Suddenly pretty much your identity has changed. Especially kids, I think it's harder with, because kids love structure. They don't act like it, but they do. It's a thing, trust me. The idea that suddenly he has to share his parents' attention, that he has to share his grandparents' attention, that he's not the center of attention, is slightly shocking. And so he goes into this garden that he has in his house, which is like an architectural marvel sort of house. And he goes into this garden and suddenly can see people from his family trees past, whether it be the family dog in some cases, whether it be Mirai in the future, his great-grandfather. He also sees his mother as a young child. And he goes on these adventures which look like they're portals into kind of the history of his family. Starts to appreciate his sister more, basically, through these various journeys and so forth. This film's a little more complex than that. There's a lot about the parents in this. It's not as simple as just the portal things. And there's a lot about this film that I can honestly tell you is very real. And real in a way that was like, whoa, for me. A horror film that has stuck with me very much visually. One of the best directorial debuts. Not the best, but one of the best directorial debuts of the year. And that is number 5, Hereditary. It moves and flows in a weird way. It's surprising and scary and unsettling and very well kept and very purposeful, but also feeling that none of the characters maybe know what's going on, and maybe the writer-director has kind of like basic ideas of what's going on, but maybe doesn't even really know the answers. I assume he probably does, but maybe he doesn't, and kind of like leads us down all these avenues. It feels very much like he understands why each of these beats are happening at their certain times. He might not understand what that beat means overall, and that's spooky and creepy, and there's a real sense of not knowing what is going on. Are these people being haunted? What is really after them? What is haunting them? And I think one of the things about this movie is it really has a great central kind of metaphor to it, and I think horror works very well metaphorically, but having such a clear metaphor. You know, I know a lot of times people say, well, Night of the Living Dead can represent this, it can represent that, and blah, 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 blah. But realistically, you know, these films have a distinct metaphor that they're going towards, and it works for them. It feels like it understands what its metaphor is. And since this film moves in kind of its own rhythm and its own pace and its own structure, it's one of the few horror movies that you could actually say is as much drama as it is a horror film, and it works in both ways incredibly well. Number 4 is by a director who I'm getting more and more excited by each passing film, and this one was no exception. It left me moved and terrified and emotional in a way no other film really left me this year, and that is number 4 with If Beale Street Could Talk. My experience with this film is so full and so rich, and I found myself like weirdly crying on the way home, but not in a way that, like, I don't know, it's like it was just such a perfect kind of film. And I think of the opening shot of If Beale Street Could Talk, and you see Tish and Fonnie just walking with these very beautiful colored clothing, and you see it's a New York park, there's trash there, it feels very natural. It feels more like a New York park than I've probably seen in most movies. But the point of that is to show like that they love each other, that they have a good relationship. It's almost like walking by a couple in a park and you kind of projecting like, that seems like a good couple right there. That immediately got me. And it's such a thing, such a little thing, but he's so smart about that. Whether it's when Tish tells her mother that she's pregnant and suddenly the volume in the dialogue changes ever so slightly, and then having some scenes of this that are just actors like in a classic, I wouldn't say classic Hollywood, more in like the 50s Hollywood. I thought of Kazan a lot and how theatrical, it felt like a theater performance, and in some of those it did, but it also felt like I was in that room and I felt that tension. The power of some of those scenes through, you know, more of expressionistic kind of ideas, interesting cinematography, artistic licenses that Barry Jenkins takes. It shows like he is a one-of-a-kind director. This next one is a film I never thought I'd ever get to have on a top 10 list, just because it never would come out, and this year it did. And boy, what amazing cinematic experience this was. This is my most anticipated movie of the year, and that is number 3, The Other Side of the Wind. Now this is of course the long thought to be lost and uncompleted film by Orson Welles that was shot between 1970 and 1976, and then recently was paid for because of an Indiegogo, I think, Kickstarter kind of campaign, and Netflix stepped in and helped sort of pay for the rest and actually complete this film. Because this film was made from 1970 to 1976, it is not really talking about now, it's talking about the 70s and youth culture and what was going on in film at the time and the perception of Orson Welles at the time and everything from Pauline Kael to sort of auteur theory a little bit, not directly, but it's like there. And it's sort of interesting, a film that was so much about the time it was made in was sort of kept in a time capsule and then released some 40 years later, almost overwhelming. It probably would have been overwhelming anyway, because when you built up such an image of a movie, it almost felt like it was overwhelming by design. Like it wanted to be overwhelming. It wanted to have all these different things. It wanted to be crazy. And I don't know if there's a time I could watch this and really be able to take in everything. You know, there's certain like have conversations you're hearing, you're not sure what's going on. It's a very interesting flow of a film, and I think that's probably one of the most amazing things of The Other Side of the Wind. You hear this hype, and I've heard the segments of interviews where he's like, oh, it's like this totally different thing, and it is a totally different thing. I can't think of any films really like it, and I like how it kind of breaks down filmmaking and breaks down this period and, you know, cuts between all these different things and analyzes Welles himself in a way that makes me think he was very self-aware of what was going on. He was very self-aware of who he was and how maybe he wasn't happy about that. Number 2 probably showed me a part of growing up that I don't think I ever wanted to deal with. It was probably the most uncomfortable I've ever been in a movie in a long time, but it was quite an amazing experience. It quite almost had me on the edge of my seat just from nervousness of watching this main character, and that is 8th grade. Most people, I don't think, have the greatest time in middle school, and 8th grade captured that, and captured that so much to me. This was like watching a thriller to me, because I just felt like I was in middle school and it was not comfortable. And I mean that in a good way, I guess. I felt very tense. I felt very scared. This film just takes place during this character Kayla, played by Elsie Fisher, who does an amazing job. It's her last week of 8th grade, or her last week of middle school. It just felt so real being in it. And sometimes there's certain movies when I feel very real in them, it feels weird even reviewing it, because it's like I almost feel like too personal about it. And this is a film that I felt like I was watching my own personal experience, even though, you know, obviously she's female and in the modern age. And I also think it's weird seeing a high school or a middle school movie from someone who's so on the outside. You know, she doesn't really have a group of friends with her all the time. She isn't like dating like the popular guy or something like that. You're really getting like, this is a real slice of life middle school movie, and especially the great performance by Elsie Fisher, who almost feels like she's just gonna burst into tears at like any time. And I mean that in a good way. Like I felt like that in middle school. I felt like I just wanted to like run a million miles away from middle school like every day of every second. It was just like awful. And so it's like watching her face, like in those situations I felt it, but watching her face just like dug it into me in such a way that I was just like, I've never really felt the way I did during this film. In fact, it was a little intense. I honestly want to see it again. In fact, I thought about doing that before I reviewed it, just because I felt like it was like overwhelming, those feelings coming back. And she was able to like, just watching her face and watching like when she get into certain situations, I would just be like, oh my god, I know what this is like. This is too much. I did not think I'd have to live through this again. That was horrible. Okay, so it's down to this. What I say is the best movie of all the movies of this year. And it was a film that, before it was coming out, I almost wanted to tell friends of mine, like, calm down. Like, what if this isn't the greatest thing ever? What if this isn't the best movie of the year? And I never replied on Twitter to anybody or like told anybody, hey, let's calm these expectations. I guess it didn't matter, because it turned out to be something truly spectacular. And that is with the #1 film of this year, Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. And I can safely say Into the Spider-Verse is better than I could have ever dreamed it would. It is inventive, it is amazing, it is fun, it has the kind of like anything goes in animation vibe to it while also being centered in a way a great Spider-Man movie should. It has a million different versions of Spider-Man, which doesn't annoy me, while also celebrating the fact that characters can change and evolve. The idea of Spider-Man is an open-ended thing, and this character can be played by any number of people. The reason even Stan Lee said that he thought Spider-Man was so successful was because once he puts on the mask and on the cover, you can kind of insinuate that he might be anybody. I mean, he wasn't, but the kind of idea that, you know, once you see that character, you can think like, I could be in there, you could be in there, so forth. Any gender or nationality or any type of person could be Spider-Man. And this movie explores that very well, while also being centered around Miles Morales and never losing focus of either. What's really interesting about Into the Spider-Verse is there's so many things going on in it. It's flipping between these interdimensional Spider-Man coming in at once, to dealing with Miles Morales' origin story, to hearing about the Kingpin, to understanding this character, to that character. I'm not going to say like Peter Porker doesn't get enough screen time or enough backstory and Spider-Man Noir and things like that, but it is able to kind of navigate through all of that and not get too messed up and cluttered with a film that could have easily done that. Visually, it is awe-inspiring and jarring, and the kind of imaginative fun of animation that we really don't get to see on this kind of level from a major studio. This is so much more fun than what Disney or Pixar or any studio you can sizably name. Like, this is like combining animation styles, this is doing amazing shots, this is inventing this whole comic booky thing. It feels 3D even if you're not seeing it in 3D. Just this like kind of beautiful moving sense to it that I've never seen in a Spider-Man movie and never seen in a superhero movie before. I mean, that's one of the things, is just like, this is like what you dreamed a comic book would be like visually. It works so well. I honestly found myself thinking later, I was like, man, I should have like paid more attention to the visuals, just because I was just so into the story of it, and I got so wrapped up into the story of it. I loved the Miles Morales story. I loved what him and Peter were doing together, and Gwen, and everything with the Kingpin, and it felt like a really great Spider-Man story. And it might be one of the best animated superhero movies ever made. I think it's like this and Mask of the Phantasm. And after I saw it, I just like, it was no question this is one of the Spider-Man movies I'm going to be watching over and over again for all time. It was just like so immediate, because it understood the lore of it and understood the love of it, but it had such a love within the film. All right, so that was it. It was 2018. There were definitely films I didn't get to see. You can't see everything, unfortunately. I'm sure you'll comment below that I didn't do that, and that's cool. But there's probably some reviews from this that I didn't get to put out yet. Those will come out later. There's other 2018 reviews coming out. We just had to pull the trigger on this one, you know. And I think this is a good list. I'm proud of this list. I'm happy with the films I saw. It's one of the few years I've really had most of the list like solidified for a long time. Well, I guess since Spider-Man, but before that, actually, it was like the 7 were pretty much. The 7 below Spider-Man were pretty much my top 10. So, or then there was Beale Street. Okay, you know, I don't know. Whatever. There's just like a lot of good movies. I implore you to check all of these films out. They're all really great movies. They're all really great experiences. You'll have an amazing time. I'm sure someone will have a problem with one of them. That's cool. Whatever. You can see each of the full reviews of these films below in the description, including the honorable mentions if you'd like to watch those. And yes, I think it was a good 2018 for cinema. I know Netflix is taking over, but granted, I had a couple of Netflix's movies or whatever on here, all sorts of distribution methods of films, from wide releases to limited releases to Netflix to one night only things to all that stuff. And I think movies and cinema are kind of more opened up to all these things, and maybe as we're going into the future, we should be more open to accepting those. And that's kind of the best way to judge cinema, is not the presentation itself, but the kind of the format and the idea of movies is probably the healthiest way to go forward, and to be open to what the next generation wants to present as a movie. And I also think people were excited. It was exciting to see people excited to see Black Panther and Spider-Man and Other Side of the Wind and countless of these films. And it was exciting for me as a viewer, a lot of these films, and the way it made me feel, the way it made me think, the way it let me escape, the way it let me not escape. I think this film was truly an awesome and amazing 2018, and I thank you very much for watching me talk about him all this year, and I hope to do even better with it next year. If you would like to talk about what you felt your favorite movies of 2018 were, then comment below in the comments. Put your own top 10 list, or anything like that. Don't put your worst, because that's like another one that's coming out later, so just do that then. Anyway, make sure to let me know what you thought of this list and your own list, and what you felt were the best films of 2018, and subscribe if you would like to.